It's a great honor this evening to be at the White Shul. B'Shus Rabbi Pelkovitz, B'Shus Chazan Gaffin, Chazan Hess, our president Steve Savitsky. Your Rav, Rabbi Feiner, is part of a group of 11, really the 11 top Rabbanim in North America that we call our legacy group. And we turn to these 11 Rabbanim, we euphemistically refer to them as the spiritual Ocean's 11, that we as a staff working with Klal Yisrael have them as mentors and as guides. And it's a great honor to be here in B'Shus Rav Feiner, in Emir Hashem, the great things that you've done for Lawrence, for Far Rockaway, and in this community. We're very excited to partner with you at the OU. The year's 1391. It's a terrible year for the Jewish people. As many of us know, the watershed year of 1248, after 5 crusades, all that Christianity had to show for itself, not a conquest in Palestine, the Holy Land, because the Muslims took that back. No success in the Ottoman Empire. The only success they had to show, after tens of thousands of deaths and people being displanted from their homes, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, they had one success. And what was that? Most of Andalusia, which is southern Spain, most of central Spain, is no longer under the hands of the infidel Muslims. It's now under the control of Christianity. That was a terrible, terrible watershed moment for the Jewish people. Not because in 1248 things would happen, but ultimately that year would be a harbinger, which would be the beginning of the downfall of Spanish Jewry, and ultimately in 1492, the death of Spanish Jewry. What happens in 1267? We're all familiar with the Vikuach, where the Ramban is forced to debate the authenticity of the Gospels of the carpenter of Nazareth, whether the Talmud is anti-Christian, and the Ramban insists upon free will, the ability to have an open argument. The Frederican and Dominican monks, they stop the debate in the middle because the Ramban destroys the apostate Jew, Pablo Cristiani, Friar Paul. The Frederican and Dominican monks would learn their lesson from the famous Vikuach, the disputation of 1267. They'll never ever allow a Jew to have freedom of speech, to engage in a fair defense of the Tanakh, of Medrashei Chazal, of the Gemara. And in 1391, there is a forced debate. That forced debate is a tragedy. It's the beginning of the very end. Even though it would last another 100 years, it's the beginning of the very end of Spanish Jewry. Why? Because many great Jewish leaders, many great Talmidei Chachamim, cannot attack the gospel, in the defense of our theology, cannot respond to the attacks. And what happens? In front of thousands, witnessed by thousands, our theology is under siege. And it gets worse. Some of the very debaters who were forced to represent the Jewish people, for personal gain, for their positions of authority, their positions of government monopolies, some of the very debaters representing the Jews become apostates. They go shmad. And the Jewish world is devastated. One of the Jewish debaters, the great Spanish Rishon that we call Joseph Albo, he writes a work called Sefer HaIkarim, the book of the fundamental axioms and postulates of our theology. Because the fear is that Jews will turn shmad, that the Jews, after this horrific, destructive event, will give up their theology. In that work, which builds and strengthens and repairs the destruction of these forced debates, in that work, Joseph Albo, Rabbi Yosef Albo, says the following, that essentially there are 3 philosophical principles to our theology. He disagrees with the Rambam. We're all students of the Rambam, the Yud Gimel Ikarim, the famous Rambam, his introduction to Perek Chelek. And he says, no, there are 3. Well, when you're going to take on the Rambam and you're going to take on the assumed knowledge of Jewish theology, you've got to have a proof, you've got to have a source. And the primary source that Rabbi Joseph Albo turns to in 1391 is the Musaf of Rosh Hashana. If Rosh Hashanah is Hayom Haras Olam, it's the conception, it's the beginning of humanity. Because remember, Rosh Hashanah is not just a Jewish holiday. Kol Boi Olam, all of humanity is judged on Rosh Hashanah. There are three themes to the day of Rosh Hashanah that our Musaf develops and describes that are the basis of our existence. They're the basis of our theological and philosophical existence. Two of the themes are not that difficult. They're complex, but not that difficult. The Malchios, God's mastery of the universe. The fact that God created the universe. The fact that He created the universe means that we are owned. We are created by the Almighty. Uman kona b'shvach kli. We belong to Hashem. What is the kapitel that defines Rosh Hashanah? Chaf Daled, Psalm 24. Ladoshem haaretz umloa tevel v'yoshveva. Not only are we the possessions of the Hashem who created us, who sustains us, but we're dedicated. We're consecrated. In Hebrew, we're hukdash l'Hashem. And that means our very talents, our very life is dedicated to Hashem. That's Malchios. What is Shofaros? It's not the Chidon HaTanakh. Find me 10 places in the Bible where the word shofar appears. No. What is shofaros? Shofar is a symbol. I'll give you an example. If any of us see on a billboard, on a cap, on a sneaker, this, what do we know? That's Nike. Just do it, right? That's the Nike symbol. If any of us see the stars and stripes, what's that a symbol of? The United States of America, our liberty. Well, what is the symbol? What is always the association with the third theme of our existence, Gilui Shechina, that Hashem interacts? I'm going to pick on our good friend Larry Rusak, who came all the way from Seattle to be here, a mazel tov, to be with Rabbi Feiner, his nephew, with the family. In Seattle, near Larry on Mercer Island, you have these computer programmers. And they create Microsoft software. When you and I, the end user, buy the software, we no longer have any relationship with the programmer in Mercer Island. It's what Plato referred to as the watchmaker theory of the creation of the universe. That's not our theology. Our theology is that Hashem interacts with us throughout history. Hashem engages us, communicates to us. And what is always the symbol, the association of Gilui Shechina, of the perceived presence of Hashem interacting with us throughout history? The shofar. Whether it's the shofar at Har Sinai, the shofar of the Mashiach, or whether it's the shofar of the Beis HaMikdash, where Hashem again engages, interacts with us. He's a providential God. Those are the two of the three themes. Our agenda this evening is the middle theme, Zechronos, the most difficult. Zechronos we refer to as what? Is reward and punishment. It's judgment day, Yom Hadin. There are consequences to our actions. Every human being, Kol Boi Olam, is judged for our actions, our speech, our thoughts. There's one problem that the Meforshim have with the Zechronos. You can't define Zechronos as remembrances. Hashem remembering us. Why? For a very simple reason. God doesn't remember. God can't remember. It's an impossibility for the Ribbono Shel Olam to remember us. Why? Because Hashem doesn't forget. Ki ein shichacha lifnei chisech vodecha, as we have in the Zechronos. There's no such thing by definition as Hashem ever forgetting. You can only remember what you've forgotten. What is memory? What does it mean to remember? To retrieve something that is latent in our mind and to bring it to the forefront. But if Hashem never forgets, what does it mean when we say Zachor to Hashem? So what Einstein proved in mathematics with the theory of relativity is what we have understood as Jews philosophically throughout the millennia. The next 2 minutes are going to be choppy waters. It's going to be a little choppy, then it'll get a little bit easier after the next 2 minutes. Our theology is this. Hashem exists in the past. the present, and the future. When we say Ein Lo Guf in Yigdal, when the Rambam teaches us that Hashem is incorporeal, what does that mean? It doesn't just mean that He's not physical, that there is no mass to Hashem. What it means by definition is He's not bound. The theory of relativity is what? Where there is mass, there is time. Meaning, Hashem is at our birth. Hashem's at the Akedah right now. Hashem is here right now. Hashem is at our death. Hashem is in the Yemos HaMashiach right now. Hashem is not bound by time. He's in the past, the present, the future. There's no such thing as past, present, and future by Hashem. It is all there. That's why you can't say Zachor means that Hashem should remember. What does Zechronos mean? What are we davening when we daven Zechronos during Musaf? What we ask Hashem for, and this is the end of the choppy waters, we say before Hashem on Rosh Hashana, Mi yitzdak lefanecha. Who could ever be acquitted before you, Hashem? Who can stand before the Almighty and say, the IQ you've given me, the wealth you've given me, the talents you've given me, the unique, distinct personality you've given me, I've used it all. All 24 hours a day, all the wealth, all of my talents, I've been your partner. I've made this world a better place, and I've perfected myself, my family, my community, the world. No human being could stand on Judgment Day. No human being could stand on Yom Adin and say that before the Ribono Sha'olam. So how can we ever stand before Hashem on Judgment Day? What does Zechronos teach us? That the way we are judged is not in a vacuum. Because in a vacuum, mi yitzdak lefanecha. How are we judged? In a context. Hashem, and I'm going to use an analogy, see us as a bridge. Hashem, judge us as a bridge between a great and glorious past that bridges that great past. We're the Mamale Makam. We're the legacy of Avraham. That great revolution that Avraham and Sarah started to bring monotheism to the world. That great revolution of Parshas Vayera, ki yadati leman asher yitzav es banav es beiso acharav, lasos tzedakah u'mishpat ba'aretz. That revolution, that religion is defined in how we treat each other, how we treat our employees, how we engage in wholesale and retail and real estate. Lasos tzedakah u'mishpat ba'aretz. That great revolution, we see ourselves as the legacy of Avraham Avinu. We see ourselves as the continuity of Avraham Avinu. All the principles that you taught us at Har Sinai, we may not be perfect. We haven't lived up to our potential. But we see ourselves as taking those values and continuing and bringing them forward. That's one half of the bridge. The second half of the bridge, because again, what does a bridge do? It links a great and glorious past to a better tomorrow and a better future. We're farmers. We are planting seeds. We're masons. We're laying bricks and laying a path for what? The Yemos HaMashiach. We may not be that perfect, that we are the Messiah, the Mashiach, but we're going to be the ones who build, who prepare, who lay the way for a better tomorrow. What is Zechronos? And this is where we're ending the choppy part of the waters. It gets easier after this. We're asking Hashem to judge us in a context as the continuity of a great and glorious past, as the legacy of Avraham and Moshe and David HaMelech, and as what? The builders, the planters for a better tomorrow. Now that's a mouthful. We have to show that and we have to prove that from the Zechronos, that is how we're asking Hashem to judge us. And let's give a couple of examples. You know, first, Chazal, every part of Musaf has three components. It lays out the theme through the Torah Shebaal Peh, the paragraph. It gives 9 proof texts, 3 from Torah, 3 from Tehillim, 3 from the Nevi'im. And then finally there's a petition, a bakasha. Let's look at a couple of the proof texts. What's the very first proof text? Noach. Why are we bringing up Noach? Take a look, please, on the second page of the handout. page 480. In the middle paragraph. Vayizkor Elokim es Noach v'yiskol hachayev v'yiskol behema. Not only did Hashem, quote unquote, remember, it doesn't mean remember, but judge favorably Noach, but all of the creations, all of the species survived the Holocaust of humanity, the Mabul. Why? According to the author of the Machzor, who we believe is Rav, the Amora Rav from the Gemara, you know why? Not because Noach deserved, he was good. Relative to the rest of his generation, he was very pious. But remember, it's the same Noach who Yeshaya Navi says, he calls the Mabul Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. Why does Yeshaya call it that? Because Noach was given 120 years and he couldn't affect one person. He couldn't transform, he couldn't save one man, one woman. So relative to his generation, he was a tzaddik. That didn't entitle him to be saved from the annihilation of humanity. Why was he saved? Because in 9 generations from now, Noach would produce what? He would plant the seed of what eventually would become Avraham and Sarah. And out of Avraham and Sarah, the destiny of humanity would be changed. Noach was judged in a context. The second source is the Jews in Mitzrayim. What does it say? I'm at the end of the second paragraph on page 484, 481. Vayishma Elokim es nakasam. Hashem heard their groaning, their crying out. Vayiskor Elokim es briso es Avram es Yitzchak ves Yaakov. What do you mean? What was the context of that verse? You know what happened? The Jewish people, for the most part, were a group of illiterate pagan slaves. That's right, they were Ovdei Avodah Zarah in Mitzrayim. There were exceptions, there was Shevet Levi. What happened? What happened? You know what happened? They were hoping, because the verse before this says the following. Vayamas melech Mitzrayim vaye'anchu min ha'avoda. The king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, he dies. And now the Jews moan and groan from the avoda. The Jews have been enslaved for close to 8 decades. Why only now are they moaning from slave labor? What happened to 7 decades ago when they killed our baby boys? What happened to the last 7 decades when we were enslaved? You know why? Because the Jews always had hoped that once this megalomaniac, this Pharaoh who's obsessed and despises the Jews, once he dies, then rationality will return to Egypt. They'll realize, look what Joseph did for the economy. Look at how he created the greatest empire on the face of the earth. Look at how good the Jews were, how we developed and built up Mitzrayim. And the old glory days will be restored. And guess what happened when Pharaoh died? And this is the Ramban and the Or HaChaim. The new Pharaoh is not a megalomaniac. He's not an anti-Semite. But he makes a very simple economic decision. I'm not willing to give up a free labor source. What will it do to my economy? And he keeps the Jews slaves, not because he hates them or despises them. At that point, the Jewish people realized, we have nowhere to turn other than the Ribono Shel Olam. What's the next verse after Vatal Shavasam El Elokim? What's the very next verse? The CEO of that great cattle baron in Saudi Arabia, Jethro, his son-in-law, the CEO, he's out there looking after the herds and the burning bush, and the Moshiach Shel Yisrael is brought about, and the Jews are redeemed. Why? Not because the Jews at this point were worthy of being redeemed, but when they committed themselves to the covenant, Hashem judged them as the Einiklach of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and as that group, who at that time were illiterate pagan slaves, would ultimately produce a people, would ultimately produce a nation that would transform the destiny of humanity. That's the context. Like Noach was judged in a context, Bnei Yisrael at that time in Mitzrayim were. And by the way, why do we bring up the Akedah? The primary theme of Zechronos, we ask Hashem to judge us in the context of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac. What is the Akedah? Let's be honest. We're the religion that says Molech is one of the most heinous things on the face of the earth. You don't sacrifice your children to the gods. How can our progenitor, how can our role model Avraham be held up as a role model by us for willing to sacrifice, to slaughter his own child? What's the point of the Akedah? What's the lesson of the Akedah? And why is it so primary? It's the Torah reading, it's the Musaf on Rosh Hashana. The point of the Akedah is this. Yes, the Malach Elokim comes out and says, Al tishlach yadcha al nar. Don't touch him. Don't touch Yitzchak. And we're taught that you don't slaughter. We don't believe in infanticide. Our God does not want human sacrifice. But if Hashem doesn't want human sacrifice, why was there a tzivoy? Why was Avram asked to bring Isaac? Very simply. The lesson of the Akedah, and that's the point of Rosh Hashanah. What's the lesson of the Akedah? If God owns us, He created us, He gave us our IQ, He gave us the parents that we have, the education that we have, the opportunities, the assets that we have. We belong to Hashem. L'Hashem ha'aretz umloa. And you know what? Hashem has a condition, and that is that we sacrifice. We give of our time, our talents, our abilities, our unique abilities have to be dedicated to making this world a better world, to building a family, a community that's rooted in ethics and morals, that's rooted in our Masorah. You don't have to sacrifice your son. There are times we do. Cantor Goffin referred to the time of the First Crusade. There are times that we actually have to sacrifice our Yitzchak. But the sacrifice that is demanded by Hashem of the Akedah is of our talents, our abilities, our resources. And you know what we say in the context of Zechronos? Hashem, we're Avraham's descendants. We're Avraham and Yitzchak's legacy. We may not be them. We may not even be able to stand the test of that sacrifice. But we're committing ourselves to follow in their footsteps. Judge us as their legacy. We will dedicate, we will sacrifice our wealth, our talents, our abilities. We will sacrifice it this year. That's the Zechronos of Avraham. And finally, the three psukim of Nevi'im. Because as you know, in Malchios, Zechronos, and Shofros, what role do the three verses of the Nevi'im have? It takes the theme and it projects it into the future. If you notice in the paragraph on page 482, Al Yedei Avadecha Nevi'im, there's something very interesting here. And whether your Chazan will say it according to Lewandowski's tune, according to Deveka's tune, you're all familiar with these psukim. But there's a problem. This is the one place in Musaf that Chazal violated the chronology. Instead of going Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, what do these psukim do? It's Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, Yirmiyahu. Why the flip of the order? So the Rav said, because conceptually the first two verses, those Zechronos, where we ask Hashem to judge us in what context? We ask Hashem to look at us the way a father looks back and remembers his child. When a father sees his child, the child may have gray hair, may have receding hairline, may have a potbelly because he's 60 years old. And he looks back and he remembers when that child was a sweet young child. We ask Hashem to judge us not the way we are today. Judge us at the time of our glory. Remember chesed, zacharti lach chesed ne'urayich, the chesed of our youth, or as Joe Pesci would say, the chesed of the youths. What's avas kluyasayich, lechtech acharai b'midbar, be'eretz lo zerua? What is that referring to? We had a conviction. We had a conviction in Ribbonu Sha'olam that we didn't need to take everything with us. When we left Mitzrayim, we had very little with us. We had a couple of meals of food. That was it. But there was a conviction and there was a relationship that we would be there for Hashem. Hashem would look after us. And we look back and we ask Hashem to look back and remember the days of our youth. And that's the same thing from Yechezkel. V'zacharti ani es brisi osach bimei ne'urayich. In the days before we sinned, before the sin of the golden calf, before we sullied ourselves. The final verse, Haben yakir li Ephraim im yeled sha'ashuim. You know what this verse is? We don't ask Hashem to judge us by seeing us in the context of when we were pristine and looking at us the way a father looks back at his child when his child was innocent and pristine. We ask Hashem to look at us and to judge us the way a mother would look at a child. You have a young man who's a terrible axe murderer, and he's standing in front of the judge being convicted for heinous, horrific crimes. And then they asked, does anyone have anything to say in defense of this barbarian? And a lady comes from behind the pews. And she says to the judge, he's such a sweet boy. He's such a sweet, edel, tayera kind. A mother doesn't just look back and remember when he was innocent. She's looking at that baby right now. She's seeing, what is yeled sha'ashuim? We don't have an English word for sha'ashuim. The best we could use is the Yiddish tchotchkes, a plaything, a charming, charming plaything. Who's being referred to as a tchotchkes, as a yeled sha'ashuim? Ephraim. This is years after, Yirmiyahu is talking about years after the 10 tribes have been exiled. And what does Rabbi Akiva say about Ephraim, those 10 tribes? Einam chozrim. They're not coming back. You know why? Because they were so far gone when they were exiled by Sennacherib and the Assyrian army, they intermarried out. They've assimilated out of our faith. But what does Hashem see? The way the mother looks at this monster. She doesn't see a monster. She sees her baby boy that she nursed and that she cuddled. And that's the way we ask Hashem to judge us, because we go back to the time when we were pristine. And we know that there's still something pristine within us. And we commit ourselves to continuing and to following in that footsteps. Hashem, don't judge us as we are, because mi yitzdak lefanecha. The way you judged Noach is ultimately the one who would produce the Avram and Sarah that would change the world. The way you judged the Jewish people, who at that time were Ovdei Avodah Zarah, who would ultimately produce the Dor Dea and transform the world when they come into the land of Israel through their children. The way that you judge, you saw Avraham. See us as Avraham's legacy, and see us as the builders of the Melech HaMashiach. And what do? And this is where we're going to end. We commit ourselves to that bris. We stand before Hashem on Judgment Day. Not perfect, not ideal, but we ask Hashem, give us the chance to be the bridge between a very glorious past, and let us be the bridge that will build a better tomorrow, a better future. And we end off, Baruch Atah Hashem, Zocher HaBris. Please, Hashem, commit yourself to that covenant. Because on Rosh Hashanah, on Judgment Day, we stand up and we ask to be judged in the context of being the bridge that will continue the covenant and create a better tomorrow. Thank you.